There's plenty of seats in the middle, the front row. I know it's not ideal, but we'd rather have you take a seat. It's going to be a nice, great introduction to the Wild Center and the Food Justice Summit. Did I do this badly? I'm sorry. Ready? Screwed things up. All right. First of all, welcome to the 6th iteration of the Food Justice Summit. We're very excited to have you all back at the Wild Center. This theme this year is the feedback. Food is health. And we spent a lot of time. I'm already screwing it up here. All right. We spent a lot of time talking about that theme. My name is Josh Stefani. I'm from Comfort Food Community of Washington County. I'm the Food and Farm Hub Manager, and I'm the co-chair of the Adirondack Food System Network.
And my name is Sawyer Bailey. I'm the director of ADK Action. I'm also a co-chair with Josh, and it's so nice to be with you all today.
It is really exciting to have everybody here. We have plenty of wonderful panels, speakers, and it's great to just be back at the Wild Center after 2 long years. I do want to thank a few folks, the Wild Center, first of all, for hosting us, and Stephanie Radcliffe is right over here. Thank you for allowing us to come back. It means we didn't break anything too bad the first time, or the first few times. AHI, the Adirondack Health Institute, Nancy Del Mastro and Andrea Bonacci, wherever you are, Nancy's back there, who've been behind the scenes. All of our sponsors that you see on the screen in front of you, and just all of you for being here as well. And we do always want to give a shout out to Craig Garden for hosting this in the past and allowing the Adirondack Food System Network to take the reins these last few years. That wasn't me. A brief history of the Food Justice Summit. I'm going to put this down. Maybe it's just sensing a vibe. A brief history of the Food Justice Summit. 5 years ago yesterday was the first Food Justice Summit here at the Wild Center, and we're very happy for the 6th iteration coming back. It started from the North Country Food Justice Working Group. A handful of folks who are in the audience today were part of that original working group that would later become the Adirondack Food System Network as we battled COVID, food insecurity in the Adirondacks, and decided as a group of organizations, community members, to come together and try and evaluate our assets, but also what we can do better collectively and collaborate on these processes to address food insecurity. So it emerged the Adirondack food system itself emerged in 2020 into 2021, and is slowly expanding over time. After 2 virtual years, we're very excited to come back in person. A lot has changed. There's been a lot of challenges, a lot of new transitions, new faces, new roles. Look around the room. I know a lot of you, but I also don't know a lot of you, so that's a very exciting aspect of our food system. And we also just want to highlight the amazing work that's been done by these organizations, the panelists, the presenters, and what is yet to come in the next few years. And lastly, just build that momentum of being together in the same space. So I'm going to turn it over to Sawyer to kind of kick it off with a few questions, and then on to our keynote.
Thank you, Josh. Josh, you mentioned that our focus today is food is health. We're really excited about this topic because it's been getting a lot of attention in national media from the healthcare sector and across our food system very recently, and particularly through the pandemic. But I think to most of us in the room today, the fact that what you eat affects your health, your nutrition, your overall well-being, that's not news to us. It's something we recognize in our work, in our communities, and ourselves. And it's such an opportunity that we have the momentum, the resources, the attention behind it to really capitalize on this moment and see what we can do to try to make sure that no matter where you live, no matter what you make, you don't have barriers to good health, because that's what a rich and full life means. So you're going to hear today across geographies, across theories of change, across different programs to see what's being done right now to try to make progress on these shared goals. And by no means are the only options being shared today. There's so much good work that we're not having the chance to spotlight, and we want to hear about it. So I hope everyone will share what they're doing in their communities, even if you're not on the stage or leading a breakout session. We're also thrilled to have two incredible keynote speakers with us in person today. We're also going to feature two panels, which is new for us. We recognize that there are a lot of food as medicine programs and produce prescription programs, so we wanted to take the chance to think about what is it like from the healthcare and patient side, and then what is it like from the community-based organization and grassroots side. So we're going to have those keynotes and our panels here in the theater, and then our breakout sessions are going to scatter us across this amazing campus. Before I turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to introduce our first keynote speaker, I just want to take a moment to really situate us in the progress that's going on for the Adirondack Food Systems Network right now. As Josh mentioned, this is a group that gained a lot of momentum during the pandemic when we saw that even though our supermarket shelves were bare, that our farmers and producers had a lot to offer, and our communities were facing more food insecurity than ever before, more visibly than ever before, and all those needs are still with us. And over the past year, we've been working to really develop a strategic plan that is going to guide a host of 15 organizations to really work together for impacts that are beyond the grasp of any one group. What can we do together that no one can do alone? What challenges are unique but also ubiquitous? So we really look forward to continuing to work on this plan and to sharing it with all of you as an opportunity to welcome more groups into the steering committee, into general membership, to really make sure that we're representative across the food system and across this geography. The Adirondacks are such a unique region because we're enormous. We're the size of the state of Vermont, and every place has its own feel and culture. And I'm curious who's in the room with us today. I just wonder if we can do a show of hands of where everyone is coming from today, because I think we're going to see, I might be wrong, but we've got a wide geographic range here. So I'm going to just go through the counties that the Food System Network represents and see who, where we all come from. So please put up your hand if you're coming from St. Lawrence County today. Okay, strong showing. Franklin County. Okay, got you. Clinton. Great. Essex County. This is a big one. Okay, glad you're representing. Lewis County, Western Adirondacks. Okay. Herkimer County. Okay, got one in the back. Hamilton County. Okay, great. Washington County. Awesome. Warren County. Great. Saratoga. Great. And Albany County? We don't represent Albany County, but I want to make sure that they're represented. Thank you, Benita. Okay. Who is coming from somewhere else in the state today? Great. Fulton, we're so glad you're all with us. And who is coming from somewhere else in the country? Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming, all of you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Executive Director of the Wild Center, Stephanie Radcliffe.
Good morning, everyone. This is so great to see everyone back in this theater. I'm Stephanie Radcliffe, and the Executive Director of the Wild Center. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that where I live and where the Wild Center is located are the ancestral and original territory of the Haudenosaunee people. The original people of this place have a deep knowledge of the land gained over thousands of years of observation, cultural traditions, and practices. And in thinking about our work here today, let me just share one small example that I think we're going to hear about too, and it's also in our climate solutions exhibition, and that is the notion of seed saving. So we've been learning about this as we developed with our partners climate solutions exhibition, and within just that one practice of seed saving, there's so much embedded knowledge of climate resiliency in that practice. So that's just one example, and that story is profiled in our climate solutions exhibition, and you can look for it as you go through the day. At the Wild Center, we believe that the wisdom of the Haudenosaunee people, along with the gratitude of all parts of the natural world, can guide a better human and nature coexistence. We're also so pleased today to welcome back the Food Justice Summit, and the Wild Center welcomes the opportunity to partner with organizations that are working to solve problems, fill essential gaps in our food system, and improve the lives of people in our community. I've always been so impressed with the people that come to this summit, so passionate and working optimistically in the face of what sometimes seems like a huge, immovable food system monster. But the fact that all of you are here in the room today and put forth your energy and knowledge to keep moving forward is inspirational. Part of what I receive from gatherings like this, and we like to host these types of gatherings here at the Wild Center, about food, about youth climate summits, about We're going to do a building conference at the end of the month. All things that are important to the Adirondacks. We love to host those here. We want to be a convening center here at the Wild Center. Part I received from these gatherings, and the young people have said at the Youth Climate Summit, is that you're reminded that you are not working alone in all of this. And I know that you have the opportunity to experience Climate Solutions exhibition, but one of the things as we worked on that exhibition we wanted everyone to walk away with is that we all have our skills and talents, and we can bring those to help solve the problem. And we need all different skills and all types of different people. And when we work together, we can really make change. So can't do everything, but we can all do something, and we all have unique skills to bring to these problems. So thanks again to Craig Garden and the Adirondack Food System Network for inviting us to be part of this conference. So I am here to also introduce our keynote speaker. Devon Mihesuah is enrolled as citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and is the Cora Lee Bears Price Professor in the Hall Center for Humanities at the University of Kansas. A historian by training, she is the author of numerous award-winning nonfiction and fiction books, including Recovering Our Ancestors, Gardens, Indigenous Recipes, and a Guide to Diet and Fitness that was awarded the Best in the World Indigenous Book by the Gourmand International Food and Wine. Another book, Ned Christie, Choctaw Crime and Punishment, 1884 to 1907, and American Indigenous Women, Decolonization, Empowerment, and Activism, as well as many other novels. She oversees, she's the former editor of the American Indian Quarterly, and she oversees the American Indian Health and Diet Project at Kansas University and the Facebook page and Indigenous Eating. So without further ado, Devon.
Thank you, Stephanie, and Sawyer, and Josh, and everybody. This is a real honor to be here. Halito, chimachukma. We came here to the Wild Center yesterday to look around, and we're really stunned. My husband, Josh, is here too. And what a place. I mean, it really is. I just was taken by surprise. I mean, this is a destination, you know, and how proud you must be. So, and I think I made some friends with those otters. I was determined, and I stood there till they came up to me, and then the turtles thought the big hand from the sky was the food, you know, god or something. So, yeah, this is great. I just love it. So thank you very much for the invitation. And as we saw in the first slide that you had up there about the sponsors, there's so many initiatives that go into foodways and our ways of eating. It isn't just one initiative. No one initiative can cover everything. And given the way that our world is changing, you know, environmentally, politically, you know, it's unstable. We don't know what's going to happen, do we? It's imperative that we learn from each other and we learn how to mesh our knowledges, because we are now all in the same boat, it seems like. So what I have to talk about today is the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement and where it is right now in 2023. And it's very complicated. And as you will see here, even the title of this movement is now controversial. There's a lot of activists involved in this movement and don't like the title of it. So that's just the beginning of what's going on here. But I thought what I would tell you, now I'm coming from Kansas, so the weather's just a little bit different. And I'll be speaking in Tucson tomorrow, so I've got to change my wardrobe when I go back. But in Baldwin City, which is south of Lawrence, where we live, we're entering into what is called Hashmali or Mahili, which is the month of the winds. And the Choctaw traditional calendar is, we've got 13 months. And many tribes, their traditional calendar was 13 months, and it's based on the number of scutes on the back of a turtle. And then the skirt of the turtle, 28, that corresponds to the number of days. So this is our month, the month of the winds, and this is when we see things like pokeweed is starting to come through, the dandelions, the goosefoot, which is over there on the right, and of course the dandelion salads. I'm always trying to tell my neighbors, please don't spray that, you can eat them, all right? And before that, and I think y'all are probably still in the month of Chafochito, which is the month of big famine, which means by this time your food stores have run out. You're really waiting for the month of the winds to show up, so you're a little behind us. But even before that was the month of cooking, and Haponi is the month where we have harvested our gardens, and this is when we're cooking, we're drying, we're salting, we're preserving. And so these are some of the things that I got out of my garden. Of course, the green tomatoes that didn't quite make it, and so you put them in the box and you hope that they're going to ripen, and then squashes and dried tomatoes and butternut squash soups. And just some other stuff, that you probably all grow if you have gardens as well. Of course, the marigold flowers and amaranth at the bottom. And then top right is the pawpaw mash that I mash up with blueberries and venison steak. My husband's a hunter, acorn squash. And then, of course, corn, right? So a book that I wrote in 2005, this is really kind of when the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement was starting to take hold, was Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens that Stephanie mentioned. But at that time when I wrote that book, it was really more a focus on people and your individual responsibility. And I realized, as all these years have gone by, that it isn't just individual, you have to have community behind you. So I greatly revised this book. It just came out last year. I revised it by about 75%. So there's a curriculum guide in the back in case you're interested. So if you teach K through 12 or even university, that might be useful to you. I also wanted to point out the American Indian Health and Diet page that I have. Now, KU doesn't support the platform anymore, so I haven't been able to post on it for a long time, but it's got thousands and thousands of links and photographs and instructional bits, and what you really might find useful are the foods and recipes on there, because I have a list of foods that are indigenous to this hemisphere. And people do like a lot of the recipes that are on it. And every year on my Facebook page, Indigenous Eating, I host the annual week of Indigenous Eating. And so this last year, Thanksgiving week, it was our 12th year of doing this. And so the goal of this, I have about 9,000 followers, is, okay, let's see how many meals we can have during this week that are only comprised of foods of this hemisphere. It could be only foods from your tribe. I mean, you can incorporate foods from South America or Central America, but it really is a good tool for students if they really don't know their tribe's food, because you do have to go back and try to investigate what was it that we ate traditionally. So the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement, and usually when I speak, it is to Native audiences, but so much of this is applicable to everybody nowadays. So the reason that we have this Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement in the first place is because the real plethora of issues facing Indian country, regardless of what tribe you are from. And tribes are facing unprecedented health problems: diabetes, high blood pressure, cancers. We have a lack of access to our culturally related foods. And of course, our foods are directly associated to the environment that we live in. So traditional Choctaws in the Southeast obviously are not going to have the same diet as, natives in Alaska, right? So this is very place specific. They also lack a knowledge about the significance of these foods. We do have cosmology stories, our creation stories, and there are specific entities that brought us food. And so a lot of people have lost track with that And so this is all a part of losing contact with culture and cultural knowledge. They don't have the knowledge or the wherewithal to garden or hunt or fish. We've got environmental destruction, global warming, and poverty, intratribal factionalism. So not only do tribes squabble amongst themselves, just within each tribe, you've got different factions. We have the loss of pollinators. People don't know how to write. They don't know how to be an activist, how to advocate. And there's also punishment for people who protest things that are happening on their tribal lands. So food sovereignty, as most of you know, because y'all are all foodies, right? It's the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food, produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods. So I'm not going to read this whole thing because you all probably know what this is, but this was a statement that was declared in 2007. But the term Indigenous Food Sovereignty is very new. And so this is where we get to kind of the problems inherent in this term. The United States says that tribes are sovereign nations, but it also says that we are domestic dependent nations. These are not the same thing. You cannot be sovereign at the same time being dependent upon the United States government. If you are sovereign, this means you're autonomous and you are free from external control. Tribes are not free from external control. And technically, at any time, the U.S. government could swoop in and shut down the tribes. Chances are that's not going to happen, but we had a real fear with the last administration that might occur. So sovereignty is an issue. And so until we have control over our rights and we have complete control over our resources and we are independent of U.S. policies, we're not going to achieve food sovereignty. So what's the point? Why am I even talking about this? Why are we even dealing with it? Do we have to be so literal, in our terminology? Maybe food traditionalism for tribes, this might be a better way to define it. Christina Schiavone, she proposes the term sovereignization, which means you may never get to food sovereignty, but you're constantly working towards it. So I think that might be where we are. We're always going to be trying to achieve it. The idea, however, of indigenous food sovereignty has been around as long as indigenous or native peoples have existed. So we have always wanted, control of our resources and our food production and our distribution. So this tribal food self-sufficiency, if we're going to get there today, it involves a very complex mesh: social, political, religious, economic, environmental concerns. It cannot just be one thing. Another book that I have out, Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States. This brings up another issue, which is that term indigenous. Native peoples are really trying to get away from indigenous. For a long time, this was the term that we preferred, but indigenous could be a lot of people. It could be people that are indigenous to Australia or Africa. So this is why I needed to put in the United States. But I think it's getting very, very complicated now because a lot of peoples in Mexico in particular are saying we're indigenous too, but this is not a racial issue when we come to native peoples in the U.S. It's a political issue because we have specific agreements with the government. This could be a whole talk all by itself, but I just wanted you to know that the term indigenous is now kind of getting battered a little bit. But you know what I'm talking about when I say indigenous food sovereignty. Within this book, Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States, there's a graph. And I know you can't probably read all of this, but this gives you an idea of just how complicated this is. And so we've got 4 of the bigger topics. We need healthy environment, knowledge, access to foods, and then the personal and grassroots aspects. So under healthy environment, it's pretty obvious. Not only do we need healthy soil and water and our pollinators, we must have a concern for the 7th generation. The decisions we make right now can't just be for us, although this is how we see a lot of developers and politicians, right? We have to think ahead. What are we doing now that's going to impact our great-grandkids, our great-great-grandkids, and so on? We need to have our traditional indigenous knowledge. We need to engage with our elders, how to save seeds. How is it that you can identify certain plants, your culinary skills, your language, all of that. Then we need to have access to local and culturally related foods. And in order to do that, this is where our tribal leadership really needs to get involved. And oftentimes they don't. And so this is what is so very frustrating. We need to have their support. We need to have the right to control food production. We need to have job opportunities and fair trade. And then there is the personal and grassroots. If you have a health issue, if you want to change, you have to have a desire to do something about it. You need to become very active. You need to be secure in your identity, have cultural pride, a reverence for the natural world. Okay, so you see how there could be a lot of things added to each one of these categories. So this is always a good exercise in the classroom. So the challenge is, how is it that we treat our food? Food, because it's necessary, right? We need it for our health and for our cultural connection. But we've got an issue, don't we? Food is also seen as a commodity. And anytime you've got something for sale, that means this is going to lead to environmental destruction for farming, ranching, fish farms. We treat cultural food as a trend, which can lead to resource depletion, additives, GMOs, competition. Okay, so again, money always is at the root of a lot of this, I think. So who is involved in the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement? Again, it isn't just one type of person. It's not just these chefs who make the beautiful dishes that maybe you've had. It's the farmers, the community workers, writers, environmentalists, local store owners. It's a very long list of individuals, and whenever I meet somebody who has just become very interested in this Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement, they want to be a chef, and they want to be a writer, they want to be a teacher, and they want to do a book, they want to also become a politician. You only have so much energy, right? I mean, this is why you specialize in one thing, maybe several things. But it's good to see excitement. The people are very highly motivated. We have food summits, seed-saving workshops, farming conferences, webinars, indigenous food pop-ups. Sometimes you'll have indigenous chefs. If they want to showcase what they can do, they'll have little pop-ups in food trucks. But the goal is to learn, educate, inspire, empower, advocate, and to network. Networking is not all that easy because people are limited in their finances. You can't travel to all of the food summits that you would like to. And some of these you don't want to because they really don't have anything to do with your neck of the woods, so to speak. So enough time has passed for us to see generally what works, what doesn't, and what are the challenges that still face us in the Indigenous Food Sovereignty movement. So, again, it's not just about planting a garden or attending summits. Skip over some of this. What we need to make sure is that our treaties are honored. And this, of course, is very challenging for tribes. There's entire, fields of study devoted to Indian law. And some people make it their entire career. The Supreme Court has a backlog of, cases that they need to hear dealing with treaty law. But these treaties must be honored in order to protect our land, to keep our land, and to make decisions about what we're going to do with it. So for tribal peoples, do you know who are your tribal attorneys? Who is representing you at the tribal, state, national level? Consider running for office and make certain that your tribal council members are informed. If you know anything about tribal politics, you know that oftentimes that's not the case. You must deal with legislatures, how to speak in court, educate those who prefer junk food, write policy, run for office. All of these things are energy sapping, and you really do have to develop thick skin. As some of y'all, if you're in politics, you probably know that. We need to develop a reverence for our land and a respect for the natural world instead of considering our resources as commodities for personal gain. Recognize the connection between a healthy ecosystem and the people. We need to have control over dams and mining and logging and grazing. Environmental protection, a respect for life. I have gardens, and this is me. We always have the little black rat snakes that like to get in there, and I'm happy to share the chicken eggs, but it's when they start coming in groups of 3 and 4 and 5. They need to be relocated. But people get really squeamish about doing stuff like that, and they squish all the spiders, and they don't like the bees, and they don't like the wasps. They're all important. And as time has gone by, every summer. I count on, now this last summer, I think I counted on one hand the number of bees that I saw, or monarch butterflies, wasps. I leave the wasps alone. I try to avoid them, but they are so crucial. They're important. So our kids need to understand that they're not all going to get you, right? A good example of what is happening environmentally, particularly where I'm from, is Sugarloaf Mountain, and this is on Choctaw land in Oklahoma. And it's the 28th most prominent peak in the U.S., which isn't saying like a whole lot. It's 2,500 feet. But in the mid-1800s, this place was deemed an oasis of springs and game and plant foods. There were wild fruits, there were bears, turkeys, deer, everything. It was a wonderful place, and a lot of people flocked to Sugarloaf Mountain just to put their feet in the water, because it was just wonderful and beautiful. So this is Sugarloaf from a distance, and you can kind of get an idea of maybe what's going on now from the foreground. Some of my ancestors are buried at the base of Sugarloaf, in the early 1800s. But this is Sugarloaf, looking at it from Google Earth, and you see that there's a lot of green, right? But then you also see in the areas around it, there's pasture land and for cows, right? And then for farmers. And so these guys are really taking a toll. It isn't just around Sugarloaf, but it's around other places too, because a lot of people will whack down all their trees to make room for more cows. So this is Sugarloaf a few years after that picture was taken of it from Google Earth, and somehow somebody got the idea they need to clear cut it. And how long is this going to take? To grow back. It probably won't. Or you're just going to have a different sort of plant growth that's going to be coming up. So this is the problem that we're facing. And this is just a small, really one example of what we're seeing, I think, everywhere. And it's very discouraging, because this is where my family settled after their removal in the 1830s. We need to have renewable energy infrastructure and clean energy. And y'all certainly have heard of the pipelines. Right? And pipelines are breaking and rupturing all the time. We see this in the news constantly. And of course, there's that fear that it's going to continue to happen. And we certainly don't want it to affect the little guys on the right any more than it already has. Fracking. Do they do fracking up here? No, they do? Okay. Well, fracking is a big deal in Oklahoma, and fracking is the pushing of liquid into the earth to fracture rocks to extract resources, oil, gas, coal, and oftentimes that pressure or the water that is forced down there is contaminated. It might be unpotable water, and whatever it is that you're pushing down there, it's going to get in the aquifers, it's going to show up in your well, it's going to make its way out into the lakes and the streams. The other thing that fracking does is it makes the ground very unstable, and so Oklahoma has hundreds of earthquakes every year. And several years ago, there was one pretty good-sized quake that actually broke the Pawnee Nation's tribal council house right in half. And so we felt a quake where we live up in Kansas, so much so that the pictures on the wall moved, and so now we have an extra thing on our insurance for earthquakes, which seems a really odd thing to do in Kansas, but this is kind of the reality where we are. We need to be able to protest for clean water and air and soil, and maybe you know that in the Dakotas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, you can be fined over $100,000 and be put in jail for 10 years if you trespass onto the property of a company that's getting ready to do a pipeline. And a lot of people are in jail right now for protesting at Standing Rock. So we need to be able to do something or say something without knowing that we're really going to be punished rather severely. Josh and I went up there to Standing Rock, and this is actually, as we left, literally in the rear view mirror, we saw the tanks rolling in. And so that was the beginning of the Army moving in and all the people, who started coming and spent the winter there at Standing Rock. We need to have the right to control our food production, and tribal farmers and ranchers need to be supported. And in the Choctaw Nation, we have 10.5 counties in the state of Oklahoma, but only half of the farmers are tribal members. So you've got a lot of intermarried people who are farmers, but also non-citizens who can live in the Choctaw Nation, and they are taking up the land. So what do we do about this? I'm not really sure. But we do need to have our own strict edicts and regulations about food safety and conservation of plants and animals and not be answerable to the U.S. because we can come up with our own rules and regulations. We need to utilize our elders' knowledge, again, about basket making and gathering and fishing and ceremonies, reverence for female deities. So most of the tribes that I mentioned earlier that do have entities that brought them food, those were women. Those were women who did that. Many tribal people are dependent upon commodities, and commods, as we call them. This is surplus coming from farmers, and they're brought to the federally recognized tribes once a month or sometimes every 2 weeks. And so you get a wide variety of things. Some of it is kind of iffy as far as nutritionally wise. Some tribes are making some inroads and trying to get organic foods whenever possible. But oftentimes what people will choose are the big logs of cheese and butter and lard, things like that, because they don't understand that maybe you should pick the fruits and vegetables, whenever they are available. We need to have adequate grocery stores and markets. A food desert is defined as an area where you have to drive almost 100 miles to a grocery store. And sometimes when you get to that grocery store, you might have a brown head of lettuce or something. So the food oftentimes is very questionable, sometimes not even edible. Our tribe and nation needs to be economically sound, and there are vast economic differences between members of the same tribes. And for example, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma was worth over $2 billion in 2020. We have a lot of initiatives. But 5 of our counties of the 10.5 in the state of Oklahoma are the poorest in the United States. How is that? These are the questions that our tribal leaders need to be answering. And this woman here, this was a story that was done about 5 years ago, and this is a grandmother who obviously is living at the poverty level, and she is taking care of her 8 grandchildren. So we need to have something done about this. Adequate medical care for all and traditional care for those who want it. And when I say traditional care, that means if you want a medicine person, a traditional doctor, to come in, as well as having a white educated doctor come in, you should be able to have that if you want. But oftentimes you're not granted that. The Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, they're spending a lot of their money on diabetes treatment centers, which is fine, but they're not getting to the root of the problem as to why people have diabetes in the first place. So my wish is that they expend more money on illness prevention. But their hospitals are wonderful, by the way. We need to agree on what is traditional food. And so this is a very contentious topic. And so these are all the choices of fry bread that you can get of the Yellow Man fry bread food truck. And fry bread is not a traditional food because wheat is not indigenous to this hemisphere. But Native people love it because it's delicious, right? I mean, if you've ever had it, it's good. It's like a sopapilla or a donut or something. But they want to call it a traditional food. And so there's kind of a reverence for it. And this is where we have a little disconnect when we start throwing around the word traditional, and that's not really traditional. So is traditional something you like or something your grandparents like, or is traditional pre-contact foods? And so to me, traditional is pre-contact foods, prior to foods that came over, right, from someplace else. And I wrote an article about the origins of fry bread, and that is on my webpage. There's a link to the article if you're interested in it. So on my tribe's webpage, here are our traditional foods, and I'll just give you one example. That bottom right, sweet potatoes. And sweet potatoes, right, are not yams. Those are two different things. But here the recipe is you get your sweet potatoes with 2 cups of sugar and 1 cup of flour, which is really odd, isn't it? Because sweet potatoes, if you get a really good sweet potato, you don't need much on it, do you? So, and as you can see, just by looking at the ingredients of these other things, you can see how tribes have been greatly influenced, you know, by outsiders' ways of eating. Because we didn't use baking powder or milk or sugar or flour or eggs or pork rinds. So it's very important that we understand what our traditional foods are, because it's a direct connection to our culture, and that is what makes us who we are. And it's empowering, to know how it was that we grew those food, how we harvested, fished, hunted, gathered, prepared, and saved. And by learning those things, you develop pride in yourself. And this is how we get work our way out of depression or maybe self-abuse, drug abuse, abuse of others, that kind of thing, because you develop confidence and you become happier, I think. Three Sisters, and I'll give you a good example. Y'all know what the Three Sisters is. It's corn and then the pole beans climb up the corn, and then there's squashes at the bottom that shades the soil, right? Most tribes now will claim that they grew Three Sisters, but Three Sisters is purely a northeastern tribal concept. Other tribes did not do this. So there's nothing wrong with growing the Three Sisters, but I argue with tribes, say in the Southwest or out in California, no, you didn't do this traditionally. You should do it now because it's a great idea, right? But this is a good example of place-based growing in food. The other thing I should mention, that concept of Turtle Island, that is also a northeastern tribal concept, no place else. So we need to have access to our traditional foods, and so these are things that I can gather within walking distance of my house: the American persimmons, black walnuts, pawpaws. Y'all have pawpaws here. You don't have pawpaws, it's too far north. A lot of places where I speak, particularly in the West, I think the north-south line, the limit of the pawpaws is Lawrence, Kansas, right where we are. And people have never tasted them, they've never heard of them, they've never seen them, but they're all over the place, in the southeast. And so we have hundreds of pawpaw trees around where we are. So I make sure that I go out and grab those. And they did an article in the New York Times of me one year, and so those are my hands. And some of my pawpaws, my little pawpaw plants that I've got right there. Mulberries, they were in my yard, and then I go out every day, and then when the time comes, I forage. And so there's wild garlic and wild onions, and I'm sure people always look at me funny because, what's that woman doing, carrying all that stuff home? But I don't jump the fence and get into Farmer Joe's property. I find stuff on the side of the road, trees that are hanging over the road, things like that. You kind of have to be clever nowadays to find things like that. So it's a problem finding your traditional foods because oftentimes it's on private property, and if it is on public lands, there's real competition. In the Southwest, for example, pinon nuts, when those things are ready, holy cow, good luck in trying to get close to getting some pinons. And what a lot of tribes are doing in California is on their private tribal lands, they are going out and gathering their traditional foods and then bringing back to their tribal lands and planting them there. So that way they can have control over them. But you still have to have some kind of measures in place so that you don't overuse them. Now, not every tribe has an agricultural tradition. Not every tribe saves seeds. So this is a good example. These are the Comanches. And other tribes that were nomadic and hunted bison and elk and deer and things, they didn't plant things. So they do not have a seed tradition to return to. And over there on the right, that's Quanah Parker, and the one with the back to you, that is Mihesuah. That's my husband's great-grandfather. And that's Mihesuah on the left. I think he's the one on the right, I think. So the problem with the Comanches today is, what are they going to do to revive their traditional tribal food traditions? They can't very well just get on a horse and go run down a bison anymore. So it's kind of a problem when you're trying to return to things that you really can't. So we need to come up with a solution for those tribes. You need to get your children outside. This needs to start very early. This is my son Tosh and my daughter Ari. He's always camera aware. Definitely, he's 29 now, so he's been doing this a long time. But instead of being separated from the natural world, children need to be outside and keep a connection to this. And schools need to incorporate traditional eating, into the curriculum. And so my kids have always been very active and, not afraid of animals. And down there on the bottom left, it's bee day. And so they let bees crawl all over them, and the bearded dragon and the monarchs and all. And so our son, and daughter, they both ran track and ran cross country, and so keeping them active is incredibly important. So many tribal kids now, they don't go outside, and oftentimes their schools don't have like a PE program or even time for them to go outside and do something. And so this is going to impact them once they get older. And, as my kids grew, for example, here Tosh is whacking sister in the face with something. Tosh was always very proud of the stuff he grew. He grew that Three Sisters garden, that was him. And so this is Tosh today, and so he likes to cook because he learned how to do that when he was young. And so this stuff stays with him, I know this might be offensive to some people, but we do need the ability to arrest poachers. Poaching is a huge problem on tribal lands. Also, private lands, if you all face that problem. We have the family allotment, and if you're not there, people will go right in and get the turkeys and the deer, and there's bobcats and other things. We need to combat the invasive species. We were talking about this yesterday when we were going around. The Bradford pear, the zebra mussels, the wild parsnip, don't get that in your face. The boars, I don't know if you all have those wild boars up here, but they grow to 600-700 pounds. Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Alabama, these things are unbelievable, and they're like little Volkswagens, and they destroy everything, and they will eat fawns. They will eat other animals if they can get a hold of them, and they tear up your farms. And in fact, if you want to hunt them, you can just go do it without a license because there's so many. And cats, of course, are invasive species. And cats really do a number on, rabbits and lizards and frogs, but especially birds. They kill tens of millions of birds per year. We need to protect our pollinators, and so we have a screened-in porch, and anytime I find, the caterpillars, the monarchs or the swallowtails, I bring them inside, so the birds and the spiders won't get them. So we try to do our best to keep the milkweed going. And I noticed that y'all have a monarch display here. And so here's some chrysalises. We do our best. And then our good friend Chip Taylor, last night he told me that y'all had him speak here several years ago. He was very impressed with this place. He just loved it. So anyway, Chip is retiring from Monarch Watch, and so he's director of this incredible initiative, the Monarch Watch. He's been on Nat Geo, Disney Channel, and so he has left several millions of dollars for an endowed professorship at the University of Kansas. So he is very much an advocate. It's not just for the monarchs, but also for bees and other pollinators. And he has started an initiative in Oklahoma, Okies for Monarchs, and he won a grant so that the tribes in Oklahoma each have their giant greenhouse, and their agreement with the Monarch Watch is that they will plant 20,000 milkweed plants in an effort to bring back the pollinators to come through Oklahoma, because as you know, their range is being quite decimated. And so this is the Monarch Watch garden on the right. There's my son again. He knows I'm zero at the camera. He's like. Also, we need to have the knowledge of how to hunt and the right to hunt. You don't just pick up a gun and go do it, right? In Oklahoma, if y'all have never been there, it's very lush. Game, waterways, there's more water shoreline than there is in Minnesota. So it is really just a game land, actually. And so a lot of these animals do need to be dealt with because there's too many. But there needs to be an educational program to show people how to do this, because it really could bolster, I guess, their diet. We need to have education about how to prepare foods. Just a few more things here. And so these are some of my colleagues, that I took pictures of at various food summits. And over on the left, that's Neftali Duran. He's from Oaxaca. And then this man is very interesting. I don't know if you know Julio Sacqui. He would come here if you ask him. He is from Belize. And here he's showing you how to make chocolate. And so he arrives at these summits with cacao pods, and then he goes from start to finish about the whole process of how it gets from one thing to chocolate. Not a Hershey bar, but kind of close. He's very, very knowledgeable about this. So yeah, these food summits are very, very fun to go to if you can afford to do it. And once again, some tribes are incorporating little farming initiatives at their schools, but not enough are. Because these kids, once they get into it, if y'all have kids, grandkids, you know how much they love planting something and how excited they are when something sprouts. It's like, wow, they see the connection of it. There are, just for your information, there are some initiatives among some tribes about seed saving. The Cherokee Nation has an heirloom seed distribution program, and so members of the Cherokee Nation can send in their application and say, I would like a seed packet, and they will send you a variety of seeds. Now, the problem with that is they don't know where those seeds might end up, because some tribal members may decide, well, I may sell these to Monsanto or something. But they do have enforcement against selling them to biotech companies, but still you don't know if that is happening. And you also have to protect them from cross-pollination. And the idea is that you grow the corn or the squashes, and then you return the seeds back to the initiative, so then they have more for the next year. And I think more tribes are attempting to do this kind of thing. Let's see. I know I'm running out of time. So one question that I usually get is, well, what can I do? And where can I go for more information? So these are some initiatives that deal with tribal foodways. The Intertribal Agricultural Council, the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative at University of Arkansas. This is huge. If you look that up, you might find something of interest. I'm an advisor for the First Nations Development Institute, and they have millions of dollars they give out every year to Native peoples. And the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. So in case you're interested in any of those. So I'll stop there because I know you got a lot of other things to do here today. But if anybody has any questions. I know that was rapid fire. I teach classes on this. So this is cramming a lot into a very short period of time. So, or you can email me if you have questions. I can't see. Okay.
I'm interested to learn your ideas about one wild repository of bison in Yellowstone Park. The U.S. government is sending out bison into the world. How you see that, and is that a good solution?
Well, there are some tribes that do have their bison programs, like the Quapaw Nation in Oklahoma. And as you know, bison, they migrate. They like to move around, and so they don't particularly like to be confined to one spot. But the more bison you have, it's been shown that, the biodiversity, increases, everything's better when you have the bison. And then there's the problem when the bison, though, they get out of their bounds. And we've seen that they come swooping in to get rid of the bison because they've stepped out of maybe Yellowstone or something. But as far as what the U.S. is doing with the various places, I don't really know. I just kind of know what the tribes are doing. But more tribes are doing it. And yesterday, I was talking to our cohort of new friends about, it was a company that was in the Lakotas there at Pine Ridge called Tonka Bar, where they had the Tonka Bar based on the traditional pemmican, which was, of course, ground bison that was pounded with choke cherry and fat, which wasn't terribly tasty, the traditional version. But the Tonka Bar really was good and tasty, and so they had a herd of bison that they used to make that. But they were completely overrun by Epic. Y'all have seen those Epic bars? They don't taste the same. They're not nearly as good. So they are out of business, and I don't know what has happened to their bison. But that's an example of something that was going great guns, and then somebody liked that idea and crushed them, you know. So I didn't really answer your question, but I do know that more tribes are doing that. In fact, I'm advising somebody with this First Nations Development Institute who's doing her dissertation on bison, just on that question that you were asking. So it's a deal, it's a thing. So. Anything else?
A quick question. It might be a little meta, but what, personally is sort of your theory of change, and where do you see yourself in this process of change? Because you had mentioned, people get overzealous and want to do 100 things. How do you kind of carve yourself out in that niche?
Well, I'm an educator. So like I said, I teach several classes and graduate courses on foodways, foodways of the U.S., or indigenous foodways of the U.S. and Latin America. So that's one thing that I do, and I'm also a writer, but I also get involved, like I said, with this First Nations Development Institute, because so many people who have gotten involved in this Indigenous Food Sovereignty Movement, they've realized they can make a buck from it. You've got some chefs that have now turned it for personal profit, which is greatly disappointing. So a lot of us are moving away from what they are doing, and we're sort of embracing what y'all are doing. It's got to be grassroots movements. We've got to start small. We've got to become more politically active, I think. But I'm just one person, and I go out and I speak whenever I can and do what I can, but as far as change goes, there's a lot of things happening. Some things I probably shouldn't be talking about right here because it's very political, and a lot of personal things with this food sovereignty movement. But I didn't really answer that question either. That's kind of a loaded question. It's a loaded question, but yeah, just what I am very heartened to see are this younger people coming up with these great, useful ideas. They're not just doing it for navel gazing or to post on social media. They actually are getting involved. They're doing things. They're getting dirty. And they're getting frustrated. And I think if you're not getting frustrated, you're probably not doing something right. Because it's hard. This is not easy. So that's what gets me very excited. We're working with 9 Native students from around the country right now with First Nations, and every one of them is doing something incredible. And I think there's going to be a lot more where they came from. So that's what I'm really hoping for and hoping to inspire. Okay.
Time, so one
Okay.
last round of applause for that.
Okay. Thanks.
For context, our next breakout sessions start at 10:10, which is in 5 minutes. We will have more in between time going forward. The 3 breakout sessions are going to be across the Wild Center, across the Great Hall, and 3 stations are the planetary climate solutions and the natural cabinet. Okay. Take some time to head to whichever
I
breakout.
want to forget that. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.